The young girl's tears fell silently as the cold metal of the knife sliced through her precious locks, her stepmother's face twisted with cruel determination. Little did they know that destiny was about to intervene in the most unexpected way, as a millionaire with a mysterious connection to their lives was already on his way back. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The rain pounded against the mansion windows like an angry fist, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest within. Sophie King sat frozen on the cold bathroom stool, her small 8-year-old frame trembling as Deborah Langston's manicured fingers dug into her shoulders, pinning her in place. The white marble bathroom, usually pristine and spotless like everything else in their Atlanta home, was now littered with long strands of chestnut hair, Sophie's hair, scattered across the floor like fallen autumn leaves. "Stop crying," Deborah hissed, yanking Sophie's head back. "Pretty is for my daughters, not for some stray your father dragged in." The kitchen knife in her stepmother's hand caught the light as she hacked away another chunk of Sophie's locks, the metallic sound of the blade slicing through hair punctuating each sob. The little girl's tears flowed freely, dropping onto her lap where more of her beautiful hair had collected. Each snip felt like more than just hair being taken. It was as if pieces of her very self were being cut away. Sophie had always been proud of her long chestnut ways, the ones her real mother had lovingly brushed every night before bedtime, before cancer had taken her away 2 years ago. "Please stop," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Daddy will be mad." The socialite laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the bathroom tiles. "Your father is in San Francisco closing a deal. By the time Maxwell returns, you'll understand your place in this family." For months, Deborah had been methodically dismantling Sophie's confidence, accidentally spilling juice on her school projects, making her eat alone in the kitchen while the rest of the family dined together, telling her she was too plain compared to her stepsisters. But this was different. This was physical, visible, undeniable. Another lock fell to the ground. Sophie watched through tear-blurred eyes as her identity was stripped away, strand by strand. The bathroom mirror reflected a stranger, a little girl with jagged, uneven patches where her beautiful hair had been. In that reflection, she could also see Deborah's face, twisted with something darker than mere dislike. "There," the woman finally said, stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Now you won't be distracting everyone with those princess airs." Sophie's shoulders shook with silent sobs as her stepmother gathered the fallen hair, stuffing it into the bathroom trash with a satisfied smile. This humiliation was the most brutal yet, the culmination of months of emotional torment from a woman determined to erase any trace of Sophie's identity from the King mansion. Outside, lightning cracked across the Atlanta sky, illuminating the bathroom in a harsh white flash. Neither of them heard the front door open downstairs. The mansion's heavy oak door crashed open, the sound reverberating through the marble foyer like a thunderclap competing with the storm outside. Maxwell King stood in the doorway, rainwater cascading from his tailored suit as lightning illuminated his imposing silhouette. "Sophie? Deborah?" His voice carried authority, even when laden with concern. Something felt wrong. The house was too quiet, save for a muffled sound coming from upstairs. Maxwell had cut his business trip short, an inexplicable unease pulling him home to Atlanta 3 days early. For weeks, his video calls with Sophie had seemed off. Her usual sparkle had dimmed, her answers carefully measured as if someone were standing just out of frame. Taking the stairs 2 at a time, he followed the sound of sobbing to the second-floor bathroom. The door wasn't fully closed, and what he saw through the gap froze his blood. "What in God's name are you doing?" Maxwell's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Deborah spun around, the kitchen knife still clutched in her manicured hand, Locks of chestnut hair scattered across the tiled floor like fallen leaves. Sophie sat trembling on the bathroom stool, her once beautiful hair chopped unevenly, tears streaming down her reddened face. "Max, you're early," Deborah stammered, quickly shifting her expression from rage to a practiced smile. Sophie needed a trim, and she was being difficult about a trim? The tech mogul's voice remained eerily controlled as he surveyed the scene. With a kitchen knife? Without waiting for her response, Maxwell crossed the bathroom in 2 strides. He gently lifted Sophie from the stool, cradling her against his chest as she buried her face in his shoulder, her small body shaking with sobs. "It's okay now, sweetheart. I'm here," he murmured into what remained of her hair, his eyes never leaving Deborah. The socialite took a step back, the knife lowering to her side. "You don't understand what it's been like while you've been gone. She's been impossible, defiant. I was just trying to—" "Put the knife down." His words cut through her excuses like ice. Deborah placed the knife on the counter, her hand trembling slightly. Rain continued to lash against the bathroom window, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the tense standoff. Maxwell's mind raced through options, calculations, strategies. The same analytical thinking that had built his empire now focused entirely on protecting his daughter. He could feel Sophie's tears soaking through his shirt, each sob a damning indictment of his absence. "This ends tonight," he said, his voice barely audible above the storm. The look in his eyes made Deborah take another step back. It wasn't rage she saw there. It was something far more dangerous: resolve. Maxwell King's first instinct was to call the police. The image of his daughter, trembling on that bathroom stool, her beautiful hair hacked away by the woman he had trusted with his family, ignited a fury he had never known. But looking at Sophie's tear-streaked face, he realized that what she needed most wasn't revenge, but restoration. "Leave us," he commanded Deborah, his voice low, but carrying the weight of unspoken consequences. The woman hesitated, knife still clutched in her manicured hand, before slipping away with a dismissive huff. Alone with his daughter, Maxwell knelt on the cold tile floor, gathering the scattered locks of chestnut hair. His hands, accustomed to signing million-dollar contracts and directing board meetings, moved with unexpected gentleness. Sophie watched him through swollen eyes, her small body still shaking with silent sobs. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked softly, holding the strands of her hair like precious artifacts. "I see strength. I see courage." His voice broke slightly as he reached out to touch her choppy, uneven hairline. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here to protect you." Sophie remained silent, years of Deborah's emotional abuse having taught her that speaking up only brought more pain. But something in her father's eyes, a determination she had never witnessed before, made her listen. "We're going to make this the beginning of something beautiful," Maxwell whispered, carefully placing the collected hair in a small decorative box from the counter. "This isn't the end of anything, Sophie. This is where we start fighting back." For the first time in months, Sophie felt a flicker of something beyond fear. It wasn't quite hope yet. That would take time. But it was the distant cousin of it, possibility. Maxwell wrapped a soft towel around her shoulders and lifted her from the stool. "From this moment on, things will be different in this house," he promised. What Deborah did wasn't just wrong, it was unforgivable. The businessman gently wiped away a tear from his daughter's cheek. "Tomorrow, we'll see the best stylist in Atlanta. We'll make your hair exactly how you want it. But tonight, I need you to know something." He looked directly into her eyes, the same shade of amber as her late mother's. "Your worth has never been in your appearance. It's in your heart, your mind, your spirit. All the things Deborah can never touch or take away." Sophie leaned against her father's chest, exhausted, but feeling safer than she had in months. The mansion still held dangers. Deborah's influence lingered in every corner. But in this moment, with Maxwell's arms around her, Sophie allowed herself to believe that perhaps things could change. Morning light filtered through the mansion's tall windows, casting long shadows across marble floors. The Atlanta estate felt different somehow, charged with a tension that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. Deborah Langston's rage still lingered in every corner, but Maxwell King's protective presence had established a new order overnight. Sophie sat at the breakfast table, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her plate. Her shorn hair stood in uneven tufts, a stark reminder of last night's violence. Maxwell watched his daughter from across the table, his heart breaking at what he'd allowed to happen under his own roof while chasing business deals across continents. "Would you like more orange juice?" he asked, his voice gentler than Sophie had ever heard it. She nodded, eyes still downcast. The household staff moved silently around them, casting sympathetic glances at the child. Maxwell had spent most of the night making arrangements. His executive assistant, Mrs. Tilda, had already been instructed to clear his schedule for the week. The businessman had also begun meticulously documenting everything. Photographs of Sophie's hair scattered across the bathroom floor, voice recordings of his conversation with Deborah, and detailed notes about the pattern of behavior he'd been blind to for too long. "You'll stay in my study today while I work," Maxwell told Sophie, sliding his smartphone into his pocket. "I've asked Mrs. Tilda to bring some books and drawing supplies." For the first time that morning, Sophie looked directly at him. "What about school?" "Not today," he answered firmly. "Not until we're sure you're ready." The father and daughter spent the day in awkward proximity, neither quite knowing how to bridge the years of emotional distance between them. Maxwell took calls from behind his desk, while Sophie curled up on the leather sofa, pretending to read, but mostly watching him, studying this man who had suddenly transformed from distant provider to fierce protector. By evening, something had shifted. When Sophie spilled her juice at dinner, she didn't flinch in fear as she would have yesterday. Instead, she looked to Maxwell, who simply helped her clean it up. "I should have been here," he said quietly as they dabbed at the tablecloth together. "You're here now," Sophie whispered back. The words hit Maxwell like a physical blow. Guilt washed over him. Guilt for the business trips that had kept him away, for the warning signs he'd ignored, for entrusting his precious daughter to a woman whose cruelty he'd failed to recognize. That night, as Maxwell tucked Sophie into bed, something he hadn't done in years, he made a silent vow. His wealth, connections, and determination would now serve a single purpose: healing Sophie's wounded spirit and ensuring Deborah could never hurt her again. The morning after Maxwell's intervention, Mrs. Tilda knocked gently on Sophie's bedroom door, arms laden with colorful hats, scarves, and even a natural-looking wig. "Sweetheart, I thought these might help until your hair grows back," she offered, her eyes kind but cautious. Sophie King stood before the mirror, fingers tracing the jagged edges of what remained of her once beautiful chestnut locks. The 8-year-old's reflection showed uneven patches where Deborah had hacked away with particular cruelty. Yet something unexpected stirred within the child. Not shame, but a quiet, smoldering resolve. "No thank you," she said softly, turning to face the executive assistant. "I don't want to hide it." Mrs. Tilda's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "Are you sure, dear? The other children might—" "Let them look," Sophie interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I want everyone to see what she did." The next morning, Sophie walked into Atlanta's prestigious Oakwood Elementary with her head held high. The whispers began immediately. Students pointed and stared as she made her way through the hallway. Her teacher, Miss Patterson, gasped audibly before composing herself. "What happened to your hair?" Lily Winters, the class gossip, demanded during recess. Sophie met her gaze steadily. "My stepmother cut it with a kitchen knife because she was angry." The simple truth, delivered without tears, silenced the playground. By lunchtime, the school counselor had called Maxwell, concerned about Sophie's concerning appearance and statements. The millionaire arrived within 20 minutes, prepared for battle, only to find his daughter sitting calmly in the counselor's office. "Sophie doesn't seem traumatized by the questions," the counselor explained, bewildered. "She's answering them directly." Maxwell knelt beside his daughter. "We can go home if you want, sweetheart." The child shook her head. "I'm okay, Dad. I want to stay." Throughout the week, Sophie's defiance only grew stronger. When Deborah's daughters snickered in the hallway, she walked past them without flinching. When parents whispered at pickup, she met their gaze until they looked away first. What Deborah had intended as the ultimate humiliation had instead become Sophie's first act of rebellion. Each stare she endured, each whisper she ignored, strengthened something that had been dormant inside her. The little girl who had once hidden from her stepmother's rage was finding her courage in the very marks of that cruelty. At night, Maxwell found her sketching a self-portrait, short, uneven hair and all. "You're the bravest person I know," he told her, voice thick with emotion. Sophie looked up, her eyes clear and determined. "I'm not hiding anymore," she said simply. And in those 4 words, father and daughter both recognized the first step toward reclaiming her stolen identity. Deborah Langston paced her wing of the Atlanta mansion, phone pressed to her ear as she whispered dramatically to her closest socialite friend. "I'm simply at my wit's end, Vivian. The doctor says it could be serious. My heart, you know." She paused by the window, watching Maxwell's car pull into the circular driveway below. 3 days had passed since the incident, and Deborah's grip on the household was slipping like sand through her manicured fingers. The staff now looked at her with barely concealed contempt. Even her daughters were keeping their distance, unsettled by what they'd witnessed. "I need you to spread the word discreetly," she continued, her voice dropping. "Maxwell has been under tremendous stress with the new tech acquisition. I'm worried about his judgment, especially regarding Sophie." After ending the call, Deborah draped herself across the chaise lounge in the master bedroom. When Maxwell entered, she pressed a cold compress to her forehead, wincing theatrically. "The doctor called with my test results," she murmured. "He's concerned." Maxwell stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Which doctor would that be? Dr. Winters? I spoke with his office this morning. They haven't seen you in months." The stepmother's eyes flashed before she recovered. "A specialist, darling. You wouldn't know him." Later that afternoon, Maxwell discovered a legal notepad in Deborah's study, filled with talking points. Emotional distress caused by husband's neglect, stepchild's manipulation, fear for personal safety. Beside it lay the business card of Patricia Holden, one of Atlanta's most aggressive divorce attorneys. That evening, Deborah hosted 3 of her socialite friends for tea. Through the mansion's smart home system, Maxwell overheard her tearful performance. "You simply can't imagine what I've endured," she said, voice trembling perfectly. "That child has Maxwell wrapped around her finger. He doesn't see how she provokes me." The women clucked sympathetically, promising support and discretion, while texting details to half of Atlanta's elite before they'd even left the driveway. Maxwell watched these manipulations unfold with calculated patience. He'd built his tech empire by anticipating competitors' moves, and Deborah was nothing if not predictable. Each lie she spun became another strand in the web that would eventually ensnare her. He made a single phone call that night to his executive assistant. "Tilda, activate Protocol 3, document everything, and please check on Sophie before you leave. Make sure she knows she's safe." As Deborah plodded in her wing of the mansion, Maxwell sat in his study reviewing security footage from the past 6 months. The millionaire's eyes narrowed as patterns of abuse emerged, clear as day. This time, he wouldn't be deceived. Sophie woke with tears streaming down her face, her small hand reaching up to touch her choppy hair. For the 3rd night in a row, her mother had visited her dreams, not as a fading memory, but vividly present, smiling with the warmth that had once filled their home. In these dreams, 8-year-old Sophie sat on a cushioned stool in a sunlit room, while her mother's gentle fingers worked through her long chestnut locks. "Your hair is like mine," her mother would say, voice melodic and soothing. "It tells our story, sweetheart." The brush would glide through Sophie's hair, 99 strokes each night, their special ritual. She pulled her knees to her chest, the mansion quiet except for the distant hum of Atlanta's early morning traffic. These dreams felt like gifts, bringing back details she'd forgotten. Her mother's lavender scent, the tiny scar above her eyebrow, the way she hummed when concentrating. "Mom," Sophie whispered to the darkness, "I miss you." The dreams had started after that terrible night with Deborah. Perhaps trauma had unlocked something, memories previously sealed away by grief and time. Each night, different scenes played out. Her mother reading stories, teaching Sophie to braid, or simply holding her close during thunderstorms. Maxwell King noticed the change in his daughter at breakfast. "You look tired, Sophie. Are you sleeping okay?" His concern was evident as he pushed aside financial documents to focus on her. "I see Mom when I sleep," she admitted, stirring her cereal without eating. "She's brushing my hair and telling me stories." Her father's eyes softened with understanding. "Your mother loved doing that. She said it was your special time together." Mrs. Tilda, arranging flowers nearby, paused her work. "Dreams can be healing, dear. They remind us of what we carry inside." These nocturnal visits were both comfort and heartache. Sophie would wake reaching for someone who wasn't there. Yet each morning, she felt a new resolve growing. Her mother had always encouraged her to speak her truth, to stand tall, even when scared. "Dad," Sophie said suddenly, "I want to talk about what happened, not just to you, but maybe to others too." Maxwell studied his daughter's face, noticing a new determination in her eyes. The dreams weren't just memories. They were rekindling something essential in Sophie, something Deborah had tried to cut away along with her hair. "When you're ready," he promised, "I'll be right beside you." That night, Sophie placed a framed photo of her mother beside her bed. As she drifted to sleep, she whispered, "Help me be brave." And once again, in her dreams, gentle hands brushed through her hair, preparing her for whatever tomorrow might bring. "It's not about fixing anything," Maxwell King explained as he drove Sophie to downtown Atlanta. "It's about choosing how you want to express yourself." His voice was gentle but firm, a stark contrast to the cutting words she'd grown accustomed to hearing. The sleek vehicle pulled up outside Luminance, one of the city's most exclusive salons. Sophie's heart raced as she spotted the celebrity stylist waiting at the entrance. Alessandra Cortez was known for transforming Hollywood stars, her work gracing magazine covers across the country. "This little lady gets whatever she wants today," Maxwell told Alessandra, squeezing Sophie's shoulder reassuringly. "This is her vision, not ours." The 8-year-old sat in the plush salon chair, her reflection staring back at her, uneven chunks of hair framing her face, the physical reminder of that terrible night. Alessandra knelt beside her, speaking directly to Sophie rather than over her head to her father. "Tell me what you're thinking," the stylist said, her fingers gently assessing the damage Deborah had inflicted. Sophie hesitated, then pointed to a photo on the wall, a pixie cut with vibrant blue streaks. "That one," she whispered, "but with purple instead." For the next hour, Sophie watched as her choppy remains transformed into something intentional and bold. Each snip of the scissors felt different from the kitchen knife. These cuts were careful, artistic, chosen. The girl's eyes widened as Alessandra added subtle purple highlights that caught the light when she moved. "What do you think?" the stylist finally asked, spinning the chair to face the mirror. A smile, the first genuine one in months, spread across Sophie's face. "It's me," she said simply. Mrs. Tilda, who had quietly accompanied them, discreetly took photos with Sophie's permission. By evening, the executive assistant had shared them on Maxwell's company's social media, with a simple caption about courage and self-expression. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments flooded in from girls who had faced their own battles with bullying and self-image. Within days, the hashtag #SophieStrong was trending, with young people across the country embracing their differences and sharing stories of resilience. At school the following Monday, Sophie walked through the halls with her head high. Classmates who had once whispered now approached with admiration. Even one of Deborah's daughters stared in quiet astonishment at the transformation. "Your hair is so cool," a girl from another class said during lunch. "My mom says you're really brave." Sophie touched her new purple-streaked pixie cut and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Pride. What Deborah had intended as punishment had somehow become Sophie's first act of reclaiming her power, and she was no longer alone in her journey. The mansion on the outskirts of Atlanta had always been an architectural marvel. Imposing columns, sweeping staircases, and rooms that echoed with emptiness. But over the weeks following the incident, the King residence began to transform. What was once cold marble and sterile white walls now breathed with life and color. Maxwell King had commissioned local artists to fill the hallways with vibrant paintings. Sophie's favorites were the watercolor landscapes that reminded her of places she'd only seen in books. Her small fingers would trace the textured canvas whenever she passed by, finding comfort in their permanence. "Do you like that one?" Mrs. Tilda asked one afternoon, finding Sophie mesmerized by a painting of wild horses. The executive assistant had become a constant presence, her calm demeanor a balm to the household's lingering tension. "They look free," Sophie whispered, her newly styled hair catching the afternoon light. Mrs. Tilda nodded knowingly. "Your father thought you might appreciate that particular piece." Music now drifted through the previously silent corridors. Classical in the mornings, jazz in the evenings. Maxwell had installed speakers throughout the common areas, remembering how Sophie's mother had always filled their first home with melody. The East Wing, however, grew increasingly shadowed. Deborah had retreated to her private quarters, emerging only for necessary appearances. Her domain had become a separate world within the mansion, dark curtains drawn even on the sunniest days. Staff whispered about raised voices and shattered glass behind closed doors. "We don't go to that side anymore," Sophie explained matter-of-factly to Mrs. Tilda as they baked cookies in the newly renovated kitchen. The older woman squeezed Sophie's shoulder gently. "This side has all we need." Maxwell ensured that Sophie's surroundings reflected security and possibility rather than constraint. Her bedroom was reimagined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, a window seat overlooking the gardens, and an art desk where she spent hours with colored pencils and watercolors. The dining room, once a battleground of tense silence, now hosted evening games and impromptu dance parties. Sophie's laughter, tentative at first, grew stronger with each passing day. "The house is breathing again," Mrs. Tilda remarked to Maxwell one evening as they watched Sophie arranging fresh flowers in the entryway, her own initiative. Maxwell nodded, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "It's becoming a home." In the mansion's transformation, Sophie found reflections of her own journey. Walls that once contained pain, now displaying beauty. Rooms that had witnessed cruelty, now resonating with music. The physical changes mirrored something deeper taking root. A family redefining itself, creating safety from the remnants of harm. The whispers followed Deborah Langston's daughters through the marble hallways of their elite private school. The older one, Vanessa, 16 and usually confident, now hunched her shoulders against the stairs. Her younger sister, Chloe, 14, pretended not to notice when classmates stopped talking as she approached. "Did you see the video?" Someone whispered. "That poor little girl." The viral photos of Sophie's transformation had spread like wildfire through Atlanta's social circles. What was meant to be a humiliation had become a symbol of resilience that resonated with people across the country. For the first time, The sisters saw their mother's actions through others' eyes, and the view was devastating. Vanessa sat in her therapist's office, fidgeting with the gold bracelet her father had given her last Christmas. "I didn't stop her," she admitted, voice barely audible. "I heard Sophie crying that night, but I just turned up my music." The therapist nodded, creating space for the guilt that had been consuming the teenager. Vanessa had scheduled these sessions secretly, using her shopping allowance to pay for them. She couldn't bear to tell Maxwell, afraid he would see in her the same cruelty he'd discovered in her mother. At home, the dynamic shifted. Chloe, who had once mimicked her mother's dismissive tone toward Sophie, now lingered awkwardly in doorways, watching the younger girl draw. One afternoon, she left a set of professional colored pencils outside Sophie's room, an olive branch she wasn't brave enough to extend in person. "Your drawing is really good," Chloe finally said one day, startling Sophie, who had been sketching in the sunroom. The 8-year-old looked up, wary but curious. It was the first genuine compliment she'd received from either stepsister. Vanessa took longer to bridge the gap. She observed from a distance how her father lit up around Sophie, how Mrs. Tilda gently guided the child, and how the mansion seemed warmer in their presence. The stark contrast with her mother's cold perfectionism became impossible to ignore. During dinner one evening, when Deborah began criticizing Sophie's table manners, Vanessa surprised everyone by speaking up. "Mom, just let her eat." The table fell silent. Deborah's fork clattered against fine china, her eyes narrowing dangerously at her daughter's betrayal. Later that night, Vanessa found Sophie sitting on the window seat, staring at the Atlanta skyline. Without a word, the older girl sat beside her. They didn't speak, but something shifted between them, a silent acknowledgement that the truth of their family could no longer remain buried beneath social appearances and forced smiles. For the first time, Deborah's carefully constructed world was crumbling from within. In the quiet corner of Maxwell King's mansion that had become her sanctuary, Sophie sat cross-legged on a plush carpet, colored pencils scattered around her like fallen autumn leaves. Her hand moved with newfound confidence across the sketchbook, something she hadn't touched in months before the incident. Drawing had always been Sophie's refuge, but Deborah had dismissed her artwork as childish scribbles and a waste of expensive paper. Now, with her father's encouragement, the 8-year-old was rediscovering this part of herself that had been buried under layers of fear. "What are you working on today?" Mrs. Tilda asked, setting down a mug of hot chocolate beside the young artist. Sophie tilted the sketchbook. "It's a girl who lost her wings, but she's growing new ones." The executive assistant smiled, recognizing the metaphor without needing explanation. Over the past weeks, Mrs. Tilda had become more than just Maxwell's right hand. She'd become Sophie's confidant, a gentle guide through the aftermath of trauma. "Your lines are getting stronger," she observed, pointing to the bold strokes that defined the character's face. "Just like you." From simple sketches, Sophie's art evolved into sequential panels, the beginnings of a story about a child who faced monsters but found her courage. Maxwell arranged for proper art supplies, and Sophie's bedroom walls soon displayed her growing collection of illustrations. "You know," Mrs. Tilda told her one afternoon while they organized Sophie's newest drawings, "art isn't just about making pretty pictures. It's about leaving something behind that speaks when you're not in the room." Sophie considered this, chewing thoughtfully on her lower lip. "Like a voice that doesn't need sound?" "Exactly that," the woman replied, gently squeezing her shoulder. "Your mother had that kind of grace, the ability to touch hearts without saying a word." These conversations about her late mother were precious gifts. Sophie incorporated these memories into her developing children's book, creating a character who whispered wisdom from the stars. When Maxwell saw the progress of her story, he quietly arranged for copies to be made. With Sophie's permission, he shared them with child therapists working with the youth center. Before long, her illustrations were being used in sessions with other children who had experienced their own forms of cruelty. "Your drawings help Lily speak today," read one note from a counselor. "She hasn't talked in 3 weeks, but she pointed to your brave girl and nodded. Sophie kept these messages in a special box beside her bed. Each night, she would read them before sleep, finding strength in the knowledge that her secret language of lines and colors was helping others find their voices too. Her stepsisters watched this transformation from a distance, their mother's influence waning as Sophie's quiet resilience bloomed into something neither cruelty nor knives could cut away. Deborah Langston paced her bedroom, phone pressed against her ear, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The walls of her carefully constructed world were crumbling around her. 3 months had passed since that rainy night, and Sophie's transformation was becoming a threat she could no longer contain. "I'm telling you, Principal Winters, there's something deeply concerning about Maxwell's sudden interest in Sophie's education," she insisted, twisting truth into unrecognizable shapes. "He's manipulating her, turning her against me. As her stepmother, I have serious concerns about his influence." The principal's measured response only fueled her desperation. Deborah ended the call with a terse goodbye, immediately dialing the school board. Each failed attempt pushed her further into panic. She drafted formal complaints, citing fabricated incidents where Maxwell had supposedly undermined school authority. She even suggested he was using Sophie's situation for publicity to boost his tech company's image. When paperwork failed, the socialite ambushed teachers during pickup, cornering them with tearful performances about being a concerned mother facing a vindictive husband. "He's trying to erase me from Sophie's life," she would say, dabbing at dry eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. Meanwhile, Maxwell King navigated these accusations with the same strategic mind that had built his fortune. He arrived at parent-teacher conferences with documentation of Sophie's improved academic performance and emotional well-being. His Southern charm and genuine concern for his daughter opened doors that Deborah's hysteria had slammed shut. "I appreciate your diligence in protecting Sophie," he told the school counselor over coffee one morning. "Her safety is my only priority." The man didn't raise his voice or make counter-accusations. Instead, he shared photos of Sophie's art therapy progress and invited educators to witness her healing firsthand. Mrs. Tilda became his quiet ambassador, arranging lunches with administrative staff where she shared observations of Sophie's growth. "The child reads to me every afternoon now," the executive assistant would say. "Her confidence grows daily." Sophie herself became the most powerful testament. Where once she had been withdrawn and silent in class, she now participated, her hand occasionally rising to answer questions. Her teacher noted how she no longer flinched when someone approached her desk unexpectedly. Deborah's desperate attempts to isolate Sophie only highlighted the contrast between Maxwell's measured approach and her own frantic manipulations. Each accusation she hurled became another brick in the wall of protection forming around Sophie. By month's end, the school had implemented a new pickup protocol that required Deborah to remain in her vehicle, a policy ostensibly for all parents, but designed specifically to limit her access. Maxwell had won this battle without ever declaring war, leaving Deborah to realize that her arsenal of lies was proving increasingly ineffective against the simple power of truth. Sophie's small fingers traced along the ornate molding in Deborah's walk-in closet. She wasn't supposed to be here. This part of the mansion had been off-limits to her since the day Deborah Langston had married her father. But with her stepmother away at a charity luncheon and Maxwell in his home office, curiosity had finally overcome fear. Behind a stack of designer shoeboxes, something caught her eye, a wooden jewelry box with intricate carvings, pushed far back on the highest shelf. Sophie dragged a velvet ottoman beneath it and stretched to her full height. Her fingertips just managed to slide the box forward until she could grasp it. The box was locked, but the key hung on a thin chain taped to its underside, a hiding place so obvious it seemed Deborah never imagined anyone would dare search her private sanctuary. Sophie's hands trembled as she turned the key. Inside lay several pieces of expensive jewelry, documents, and beneath it all, a sealed envelope addressed in flowing handwriting, "For my Sophie, when she finds her voice." "Dad!" she called, clutching the envelope to her chest. "Dad, come quick!" Maxwell King appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from concern to curiosity. "What have you found, sweetheart?" "It's from Mom," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. Her handwriting. Father and daughter retreated to Maxwell's study. With gentle hands, he helped her open the envelope, careful not to tear what might be their most precious connection to the woman they'd both lost. The letter inside was 5 pages long, written in the same elegant script. Sophie's mother had known she was dying and had prepared for a future she wouldn't see. She detailed a trust fund she'd established for her daughter, money Deborah had apparently concealed from both Sophie and Maxwell. "My darling girl," Maxwell read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. "Never let anyone silence you. Your voice is your power. Your father will protect you, but your spirit, that magnificent, stubborn spirit, is what will carry you through this world." Sophie wiped tears from her cheeks. She knew I'd need to hear this someday. Maxwell nodded, scanning the financial documents attached to the letter. "Your mother was always the wisest of us, and now she's given us exactly what we need." The trust fund wasn't just money, it was independence. It was proof that Sophie's mother had wanted her daughter to stand on her own someday, free from anyone who might try to control her. That night, Sophie slept with the letter beneath her pillow. For the first time since the night of the knife, she dreamed not of loss, but of her mother's smile, her voice clear as morning light. "Speak, my darling. The world is waiting." Maxwell King sat alone in his home office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his face as rain tapped against the windows. For 3 nights straight, he had been meticulously combing through financial records of the family foundation, following a hunch that had been gnawing at him since discovering Sophie's mother's letter. "This doesn't add up," he muttered, comparing spreadsheets side by side. The self-made millionaire had built his fortune by recognizing patterns, and the pattern before him was unmistakable. Nearly $200,000 had vanished over the past 18 months, disguised as educational expenses and therapeutic interventions for Sophie that had never actually occurred. The tech entrepreneur pulled up bank statements showing regular transfers to accounts he'd never authorized. Each transaction bore Deborah Langston's digital signature, carefully hidden beneath layers of paperwork and false documentation. His wife had been systematically draining resources meant for Sophie's care, redirecting them to offshore accounts and luxury purchases. "Tilda, could you come in here?" Maxwell called, his voice steady despite the anger building inside him. His executive assistant appeared moments later, notepad in hand. "What have you found?" she asked, recognizing the determined look on her employer's face. "Evidence," he replied, turning the screen toward her. "Deborah's been stealing from Sophie's care fund since the day she moved in. Look at these so-called therapy sessions, $300 per hour, twice weekly. Sophie never attended these." Mrs. Tilda leaned closer, her expression darkening. "And these school enrichment programs?" "Non-existent. I called the academy yesterday. They've never offered half these services." The next morning, Maxwell contacted the family's financial advisors and legal team. By afternoon, he had initiated a formal investigation, freezing several accounts and securing all financial documentation. His strategic mind, which had built a tech empire, now focused entirely on protecting his daughter's future. Word spread quickly through Atlanta's elite circles. At the country club, whispers followed Deborah as she tried to maintain appearances. Her usual lunch companions suddenly had other engagements. The charity board she chaired called an emergency meeting without her knowledge. When confronted with the evidence in Maxwell's study, Deborah's carefully constructed facade crumbled. "You have no idea what it costs to maintain our position," she hissed. "That money was ensuring our family's place in society." That money was for Sophie, Maxwell replied coldly. And you've just given me everything I need to end this charade once and for all. As Deborah stormed out, Maxwell gazed at a photo of Sophie on his desk. The financial deception was another piece of evidence in the growing case against the woman who had hurt his daughter. The balance of power in the mansion had shifted permanently, and Sophie's future was now secure in ways that went far beyond money. The youth center buzzed with anticipation as Sophie King stood behind the small podium, her hands trembling slightly against the wooden surface. The 8-year-old glanced toward the back of the room where Maxwell King gave her an encouraging nod. 3 months had passed since that rainy night when her stepmother had taken a kitchen knife to her hair, yet the memory still felt raw whenever she had to speak about it. "My name is Sophie," she began, her voice small but steady, "and this is my story." The audience, mostly teenagers and parents from around Atlanta, listened in rapt silence as the child recounted her experience. Sophie spoke about the bathroom, the cold tiles, and Deborah Langston's cruel words. She described how her father had returned home and changed everything. With each word, her voice grew stronger. Mrs. Tilda sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The executive assistant had helped Sophie prepare for this moment, spending hours rehearsing in the mansion's newly redecorated living room. "You don't have to share everything," she had told Sophie, "only what feels right." When Sophie showed photographs of her transformation, from the jagged cuts Deborah had inflicted to the stylish, confident look the celebrity stylist had created, murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd. Several young girls in the audience touched their own hair self-consciously. "I was scared people would laugh," Sophie admitted, "but then I realized my hair doesn't decide who I am." After her speech, a line formed of people wanting to speak with her. A teenage girl with burn scars on her arms hugged Sophie tightly. "You made me feel brave enough to stop wearing long sleeves," she whispered. Maxwell watched from a distance, his pride tempered by the weight of what his daughter had endured. He exchanged glances with the youth center director, who was already fielding calls from other organizations interested in Sophie's story. The experience left Sophie emotionally drained. On the drive home in Maxwell's automobile, she leaned against the window, watching Atlanta's skyline blur past. "Was I okay, Dad?" she asked. "You were extraordinary," he answered, reaching over to squeeze her hand. That night, Sophie added new illustrations to her rowing collection, sketches of the faces she'd seen today, people whose lives she had touched. The mansion felt different now, warmer somehow. Even as she drifted to sleep, Sophie knew that sharing her pain had transformed it into something powerful. Her story was no longer just her own. It had become a lifeline for others, a responsibility that exhausted and exhilarated her in equal measure. The invitation arrived on embossed stationery. Sophie had been selected as the youngest speaker at the National Youth Empowerment Conference in Washington, D.C. What began as a viral moment had transformed into something much larger, a platform where her story could reach thousands of young people across America. Maxwell King beamed with pride as he helped his daughter prepare her speech. "Remember," he said, adjusting her collar, "your words belong to you now. No one can take them away." Sophie nodded, her short, styled hair bouncing slightly. The conference organizers had called her story a testament to resilience in the face of domestic abuse. The 8-year-old didn't fully understand those big words, but she knew what it meant to stand tall after being knocked down. As Mrs. Tilda helped Sophie pack her small suitcase, news of the invitation spread through Atlanta's social circles. When it reached Deborah Langston, the woman's carefully maintained facade cracked. Her stepdaughter, the child she had tried to diminish, was now being celebrated on a national stage. "She'll make me look like a monster," Deborah hissed to her lawyer over the phone. "I won't allow it." Her daughters listened from the hallway, exchanging worried glances. The older one slipped away to text Maxwell a warning. The morning of the conference dawned bright and clear. Sophie stood backstage, clutching note cards in trembling hands. Maxwell adjusted her microphone, whispering encouragement. Mrs. Tilda stood nearby, ready with water and moral support. None of them noticed Deborah slipping past security, using her still valid identification as Sophie's stepmother. She moved through the backstage area with practiced confidence, her designer heels clicking purposefully against the polished floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed, "please welcome our youngest speaker, whose courage has inspired millions online." As Sophie stepped toward the stage entrance, a familiar perfume wafted through the air. She froze, turning to find Deborah blocking her path. "You ungrateful little liar," her stepmother whispered, voice low enough that only Sophie could hear. "I'm here to tell them what really happened." Sophie's heart hammered in her chest. For a moment she was back in that bathroom, powerless and afraid. But then she felt Maxwell's hand on her shoulder. "Security," he called calmly, never taking his eyes off Deborah. 2 guards appeared instantly. "This woman is not authorized to be here," Maxwell stated firmly. "She has a restraining order against approaching my daughter." As the guards escorted a protesting Deborah away, Sophie took a deep breath. The audience waited, unaware of the drama unfolding backstage. This moment, her voice, her story, belonged to her now. "Ready?" Maxwell asked gently. Sophie nodded and stepped into the spotlight, leaving Deborah's fury in the shadows where it belonged. The Atlanta courthouse buzzed with tension as Maxwell King and Deborah Langston faced each other across the polished oak table. The guardianship hearing had drawn significant attention, with several reporters lingering outside despite the private nature of the proceedings. Maxwell sat tall, his usual confident demeanor tempered by the gravity of what was at stake: his daughter's future. Mrs. Langston has provided a stable home environment for nearly 3 years. Deborah's attorney argued, his voice smooth with practiced sincerity. "These allegations are simply the result of a child's imagination and a father's guilt over his frequent absences." Sophie sat beside her father, wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Tilda had helped her choose that morning. The executive assistant had whispered words of encouragement before taking her seat in the gallery. The 8-year-old's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes remained clear and focused. When Maxwell's attorney presented the documented pattern of emotional abuse, Deborah's face hardened into a mask of indignation. "These are fabrications," she hissed, loud enough for the judge to hear. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her designer handbag. The turning point came when Sophie was called to speak. The judge, a compassionate woman with 30 years of family court experience, leaned forward as the child approached the stand. "Sophie, do you have something you'd like to share?" she asked gently. The young girl nodded and carefully unfolded a piece of paper, her mother's letter. Her voice, small but unwavering, filled the hushed courtroom. "My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, remember that your voice matters. The trust fund is yours alone, but your greatest inheritance is your spirit. No one can take that from you," said Deborah. Deborah's face drained of color. The socialite had clearly never expected this letter to surface, much less be read aloud in court. Her attorney attempted to object, but the damage was done. Under cross-examination, Deborah's carefully constructed narrative crumbled. When questioned about the night with the kitchen knife, she stumbled over contradictions. When financial records were presented, showing how she had redirected Sophie's trust fund money, her composure finally shattered. She needed to learn her place in this family, Deborah snapped, her mask of civility slipping completely. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's gavel came down with finality. "Sole legal and physical custody is granted to Maxwell King," she announced, her voice firm with conviction. "Mrs. Langston will have supervised visitation only, pending completion of court-mandated therapy." As they left the courthouse, Sophie slipped her small hand into Maxwell's. For the first time since that stormy night, she felt truly free. The weight of Deborah's control had lifted, and the path forward, though still uncertain, finally belonged to her. The recordings played with crystal clarity throughout the courthouse speakers. Maxwell King stood tall, his expression solemn as the evidence he had meticulously gathered over months spoke for itself. The smart home system, installed throughout the mansion for convenience and security, had captured everything. Deborah Langston's venomous words, her calculated cruelty, the sound of Sophie's quiet sobs. "You're nothing but a burden," Deborah's voice echoed. "Your father only keeps you out of obligation." The courtroom fell silent. Several jurors wiped tears as Sophie's small voice responded, "I just wanted to show you my drawing." Maxwell had been strategic, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal this evidence. After gaining guardianship, he made the decision to share selected recordings with Atlanta's district attorney, who immediately pursued charges of child abuse and emotional cruelty against Deborah. "I never imagined I'd need to record what happened in my own home," Maxwell told reporters gathered outside. "But sometimes the truth needs witnesses." Within days, the story dominated local news. The socialite who had once hosted Atlanta's most exclusive charity galas found herself uninvited from every significant event. Women who had competed for Deborah's approval now denied ever being close to her. The country club where she had held court every Sunday brunch quietly revoked her membership. Mrs. Tilda organized the evidence with meticulous care, creating timelines that showed the pattern of abuse. "Some monsters hide in plain sight," she remarked to Maxwell as they reviewed the materials. "They count on our silence." Deborah's former friends issued carefully worded statements distancing themselves from her actions. The most painful blow came when her oldest daughter gave an interview to a local magazine, confirming that her mother's behavior had always been controlling and sometimes cruel. "My mother taught us that image was everything," she admitted. "I'm only now learning how wrong that is." The mansion, once Deborah's showcase, became her prison as photographers camped outside, hoping to capture her fall from grace. She refused to leave, sending assistants for necessities while she plotted some way to salvage her reputation. Maxwell ensured Sophie was shielded from the worst of the media storm. "This isn't about revenge," he explained to his daughter as they shared ice cream one evening. "It's about truth." Sophie nodded, understanding more than most 8-year-olds ever should. "Truth is stronger than knives," she said simply. The elite circles that had once enabled Deborah's behavior, through their silence, now faced their own reckoning. Whispers of "Did you know?" and "Why didn't we see it?" spread through exclusive dining rooms and private clubs across Atlanta. The mansion that once felt like a prison now radiated warmth and life. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been shuttered during Deborah Langston's reign, illuminating walls adorned with Sophie's artwork and photographs of her and Maxwell King's adventures together. The cold marble floors that had witnessed her humiliation now echoed with laughter and the patter of visiting children's feet. 6 months after the court battle, Sophie sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by stacks of her newly published children's book, The Girl Who Found Her Voice. Maxwell watched from the doorway, his chest swelling with pride as his daughter carefully signed each copy. The transformation in their relationship had been profound. What began as a protective bond had blossomed into something deeper, a connection of mutual trust and genuine love. "Dad, look at this one," Sophie called, holding up a letter. The 8-year-old's eyes sparkled as she read aloud from a fan mail sent by a child in Oregon who had found courage through her story. Maxwell moved to sit beside her, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. Mrs. Tilda entered with a tray of cookies and tea, setting it down before joining them on the floor. The executive assistant had become family in all but name, her steady presence a cornerstone of Sophie's healing journey. "I think your mother would be incredibly proud," Mrs. Tilda said softly, helping Sophie organize the growing pile of letters. Though the scars remained, Sophie still occasionally woke from nightmares of that rainy night. Her resilience shone through. The trust fund revealed in her mother's letter had been dedicated to a foundation supporting children affected by domestic abuse, transforming her pain into purpose. Maxwell had transformed too. The driven entrepreneur now scheduled business around Sophie's needs rather than the other way around. The pair had established new traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon art sessions, and bedtime stories that never failed, even when business called from across the globe. The mansion staff, once intimidated by Deborah's cutting remarks, now moved freely through the house. The kitchen became a gathering place rather than a domain of tension. Even the gardens had been replanted with Sophie's favorite flowers. Erasing the formal arrangements Deborah had insisted upon. "Sometimes I still feel her here," Sophie admitted one evening, her fingers tracing the spine of her book. "The hurt she caused?" Maxwell asked gently. Sophie shook her head. "No, my real mom, like she's watching over us." Maxwell embraced his daughter, knowing that while they couldn't erase the past, they had created something beautiful from its ashes. Sophie's indomitable spirit had not just survived, it had flourished, becoming a beacon for others walking through darkness toward their own light. 10 months after that stormy night in the Atlanta mansion, Sophie stood on the gleaming stage of the National Youth Conference, her once shorn hair now styled in a confident pixie cut that framed her bright eyes. The 8-year-old adjusted the microphone, her small hands steady as she gazed out at hundreds of faces, some bearing tears, others showing fierce admiration. The metallic sound of the kitchen knife that had once cut through her chestnut locks now existed only in fading nightmares, replaced by thunderous applause that washed over her like healing rain. "My name is Sophie King," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "And this is what courage looks like." She gestured to herself, not just to her hair, but to her whole being. The audience rose to their feet, many holding copies of her illustrated children's book that had become a symbol of resilience for young people across the country. From the wings, Maxwell watched his daughter with tears glistening in his eyes. The tech entrepreneur who had built empires from nothing felt humbled by the strength of the small figure commanding the stage. Their journey from that bathroom floor to this moment had transformed them both. The self-made millionaire had learned that his greatest achievement wasn't measured in dollars, but in the healing of his child's spirit. Mrs. Tilda stood beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The executive assistant had become family during these months, her gentle guidance helping Sophie find her voice through art and words when speaking felt impossible. In the audience, one of Sophie's stepsisters sat quietly, her journey toward redemption still unfolding. The girl had broken free from Deborah's influence, choosing empathy over cruelty. Their relationship remained fragile, but healing, one careful conversation at a time. The mansion that had once felt like a prison now bustled with warmth and creativity. The smart home system that had captured evidence of abuse now played Sophie's favorite music throughout sun-filled rooms adorned with her artwork. The jewelry box containing her mother's letter sat proudly on her bedside table, no longer hidden, but honored. As Sophie concluded her speech, she locked eyes with her father. Their shared smile acknowledged the scars they would always carry, but also celebrated the beauty they had found beyond the pain. The journey from violation to vindication had changed them forever, proving that even in the ugliest moments, seeds of transformation can take root. Sophie's revolution against cruelty had become a beacon for many, illuminating the truth that sometimes healing begins with a single act of defiance, like refusing to hide a haircut meant to break your spirit.